Hello, caller. You're on the air at KWMR. What's your first name?
My first name is Katie.
Hi, Katie. Thanks so much for calling us right away.
My pleasure.
So, Katie, how you've been working at the Lagunitas School District for how many years?
Well, I'm retired now. I taught there for 20 years, and I've been retired from classroom teaching for 10 years, and I'm now teaching at Dominican University, where I'm in the Liberal Studies Department, which is also known as the Teacher Education Department.
Nice. And you had children go through the Lagunitas School District as well, right?
Yes. They went through the public Montessori program.
Well, that's the one I'm most familiar with, and that's how we first met.
Exactly.
And so it's something I wanted to highlight here in West Marin. I think how incredibly lucky, I don't know if it's lucky, but how parents have worked to create something here that's quite unique. Would you concur that Lagunitas District is kind of unique?
It's very unique. And in my role now as a college instructor working with students, freshmen through through seniors, through student teachers, who are mostly getting their on-site training in the public schools in San Rafael and also in Novato and a few other districts around the county. I feel like I'm always the voice that's saying to my students, you aren't going to see this anywhere else. You aren't going to hear this anywhere else. So I'm the person who, in a way, is rocking the boat by telling you that the teacher does not have to be the center of attention, that students should learn how to plan their own time and be independent, responsible people, because, in my opinion, that's a huge job of the schools, is to create independent, clear-thinking adults.
And what I
grooming them all along the way for that.
Yeah, as a young parent who was fearful of, would my kids get the best education? Would they ultimately go to the best universities? Mm-hmm. Would they do well in society and all that? I was like very typical, I believe, fearing that we'd make a bad choice. But what I loved at Lagunitas is that we had a choice. We already had a traditional program. We had academics and enrichment. We had an academics plus program that was slightly different. And we had an open program that had fought to create a place where more the learner followed model is done, rather than this is what's on the curriculum today for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen in Lagunitas especially? How was that able to occur there?
That's an interesting question that I don't really have an answer to. However, I do know that the culture of a community has an enormous impact on the kind of schools that community creates. And so in the San Geronimo Valley in the 60s, I believe the open classroom started in 69 or 70. I'm not positive about the dates, but it was really a response to a group of committed parents who wanted to see a program available for their children in which the children would be at the center of their education and that they would have freedom. I mean, the simplest kind of freedom, the freedom to move about a room. Mm-hmm. The freedom to walk around a room, the freedom to call your teacher by his or her first name, the freedom to say, I'm really interested in dinosaurs. Could I do some research on dinosaurs? And your teacher's going to say, yes, you may. And that doesn't mean that you don't learn how to read and you don't learn how to write and you don't learn how to compute. You learn all those things too. But the structure is really different.
I like one aspect of the open program that actually requires parents to participate in one way or another. It doesn't have to be in the classroom, but it can be for fundraising or behind-the-scenes organization.
Yes. And that might be a little less pronounced now than it was a few decades ago, because more and more parents are really at their full-time jobs. And but it's still a very big component of the program. And I guess I want to say, as Bernie knows, because he was right there, that the public Montessori program really started in the same exact way, when there was a time available for there to be a new program because another program had closed, and it was a group of parents whose children had been in the local Montessori preschool who pretty much put their heads together and said, okay, the open parents did it some years ago, now it's our turn. And they were able to convince the school board that it was a good idea. The parents made a financial commitment to hire a Montessori-trained teacher to work with the on-staff.
Judy Bauerlein?
Yeah, Judy Bauerlein, who worked with Tony Stock, who was the on-site teacher, who said, yes, I'm ready for a change. I'll be happy to teach this first class, which was a first, second, and third grade class.
Katie, can I fill in? One part there was the school board at first voted 3-2 to deny it, saying that this would be a private school within a public setting. And we actually had to run a couple of candidates, of which I was one, and then one, and change the majority on the board to allow parents the exchange of a new program coming in, even though administration felt it was a big burden. And I remember the day I got to take on that job, Ed Foster, who was the superintendent that had opposed it, resigned. And I thought that was community exerting its local control.
So and so the need for Montessori was because the other program in the school district was declining, or it was just an addition?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and it's happened several times over the years. Where enrollment in one program will diminish to the extent that it's just way too expensive for the district to fund. Say kindergarten through fifth grade, which generally is going to require 3 teachers. But if you only have, say, 50 students enrolled in that program, it's a huge expense, and so. Over the years, programs have just basically folded. And
Waldorf recently, unfortunately,
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and that was a battle because there were committed parents who wanted the Waldorf to continue. It was just a numbers game, ultimately, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't fall into the camp of people who would completely fault the district for being fiscally responsible, because sometimes what would happen at Lagunitas, if that's what we want to talk about right now, is that it was expensive sometimes to run programs that had very low enrollment, and then teachers don't get the pay raises that they would like to have, and the facilities can't be maintained in the way they need to be if the district is essentially buoying up a program that isn't attracting students.
I wanted to use this opportunity, Katie, to talk about Richard Sloan. He was the one board member who, I guess he's been in that job for 30 or 40 years,
forever.
Stood steadfast always in supporting what parents were asking for, and was pushing back at administrative constraints that came from the state of California that come in the form of budget. I remember him even talking about, well, if we have to, we'll just shut the school down when we run out of money. I mean, it was very radical thinking, but it was the kind of thinking that allowed a greater diversity to flourish. And I remember going to a San Anselmo School District Board meeting where parents had been denied the opportunity to get an interdistrict transfer to come to Lagunitas because they felt that they have the best curriculum, the best teachers, and there's no need for anyone to leave. There was sort of this authoritative view of what is the best and what is right, and parents are just going to have to conform. And it really shocked me, but it made me really proud to be from the small district in West Marin.
Yeah, I mean, we really did pull it off, and I don't know of any other district that has been able to support alternative programs with established multi-grade level configurations and so on, things that are considered to be really radical. I don't know of a place that's managed to pull that off anywhere, really. And you know, in the work that I do at Dominican, and just what I've seen among teachers, you know, I know who teach in other districts, it's often considered a burden for a teacher to be assigned to a multi-grade level class, even 2 grades, like to be teaching 2nd and 3rd or 4th and 5th. And at Lagunitas, in Open and Montessori and Waldorf as well, we've embraced that. Because, I mean, we think it's educationally better for the students and certainly more interesting for the teacher.
I like it in the sense that a kid comes in and they're younger, and then there are other kids who help mentor them that are in a more advanced age or grade, and then the child gets to be in the middle, and then they get to be at the top end of help mentoring other young children coming in. So it gives this socialization aspect of education a great opportunity to work, as opposed to everybody being exactly in the same grade and sort of competing for grades and stuff.
And I would say that in both programs, the quality of cooperation is valued far more than the value of competition. And that's catching on in education across the board. I mean, that is something that is the idea of students collaborating and working together and cooperating is really valued now in the field, whereas before, I don't think it really was so much. And another thing I just want to add is that it makes your classroom feel more like a family. To have younger children, middle children, older children, everybody kind of helping each other out. It allows, you know, the younger child who is really great at math can be learning easily for the teacher in a math group with older students who are at that child's math level. And it's very seamless and fluid.
I have a quick question. How does the Lagunitas School deal with standardized testing, and particularly the Common Core standards?
Right. Well, you know, keep in mind that I've been away from the district for 10 years.
Okay.
Although, I'm not in the thick of it right now, although I am a mentor for 2 new teachers at Lagunitas. So I am on campus still.
A lot of parents opt out, don't they?
Do they?
In the open classroom, there is a high percentage of parents, I don't know what it is, who opt out of having their children tested. In the other programs, most of the children are tested. So it's hard to say. I know that teachers in all the programs place a really high value on education, and they want their students to be academically inclined, to be academically oriented, to be curious, and to learn the material that the state of California puts out there. But, you know, there's no way that any teacher anywhere can cover everything that's in the state standards. It's impossible. You know, the kids would be in school from 6 in the morning till 6 at night if you were going to cover everything that's in the curriculum.
And as a parent, I resented all that homework. Katie, I'm going to ask us to move along, but I thank you so much for calling in and helping us.
My pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
And this is Let's Talk Radio with co-hosts Paul Reffell, Bernie Stephan, and Raven Gray. Please call on 663-8492 and share with us how you feel about education, teacher-centered or student-centered approaches on education. Do you think the Common Core and the federal programs for testing are working? Give us a call.
And speaking of callers, do we have one?
Yes, we do. Hello, caller. You're on the air at KWMR. What's your first name?
Hello, KWMR. My name is Alden.
Hey, Alden.
Alden.
Hi, Alden.
So nice to hear your voices on the air.
Well, it's great hearing your voice.
Thank you. I believe I know all 3 of you. and am known to the West Marin community. I was working on starting a school, also with Raven's participation over the course of a number of years. And after 2 good passes, I put my tail between my legs and skedaddled over the hill for the last year. But I wanted to just join the conversation here, and maybe someone could ask a question just kind of to get something rolling.
So, Alden, did you see a need for an alternative to the normal, traditional American public school model of 30 kids in a classroom?
Oh, my goodness. The simple answer, obviously, is yes, and I think that one of the most compelling arguments for the reason for that is that there is an incredible lag time between the innovations in education and how they're applied, particularly in slow-moving, bureaucratic educational systems. And so I still am very interested in creating educational environments that represent the cutting edge. I mean, we expect this in medicine. If you want to get really good surgery or medicine, you go to where people are not living in 1970. And in the case of, mainstream education, I think we're living long before 1970. So I definitely think that we could benefit everywhere, but particularly in West Marin from, applying best practices, I guess we could say.
Do you want to talk about some of those as kind of a paradigm shift as you see it?
Well, I think there's been a lot of progress, and of course the Lagunitas School is an excellent example of people really working on creating applying some of these things. I think one of the I wanted to educate the viewers, I guess for listeners, about the term. We've all heard the term pedagogy, but there's also a term. Pedagogy means direction of children, but there's a term andragogy, and that means education of adults. Most people, I guess, that isn't a very common term, but I wanted to read you all the basic principles of adult.
How many pages is that?
It's about 7 principles.
Okay.
And I'm going to read these as they are, andragogy principles, but I want to ask you all to replace the word adult with children and see if it still works. So this is considered to be the polarization against, the opposite of pedagogy, these principles. So adults must want to learn. Adults will only learn what they feel they need to learn. Adults learn by doing. Adult learning focuses on problems, and the problems must be realistic. Experience affects adult learning. Adults learn best in an informal situation, and adults want guidance.
Mm-hmm. Boy, you're so right. I mean, that absolutely doesn't matter. You could substitute the word humans. And, there's nothing sacred about the ages, 5 to 18, for example, that becomes our focus for education, or the hours of, 8 to 3, 5 days a week, 180 days a year, and that kind of a view. What you're talking about is just how do we as human beings learn, and that's fundamental, and it doesn't change between children and adults, clearly.
Yeah, it's in my experience. I was very fortunate to have the experience of going to one of the pioneering child-directed schools on the planet called Sudbury Valley School, which and I graduated from that in high school. And that was a very kind of orthodox child-directed environment. And I know child-directed is highly lauded in our progressive communities. But I also saw limitations in that. And, of course, there are limitations in this pure teacher-directed because, it doesn't necessarily trigger self-motivated inquiry same level. So what I really feel is of great, I think that the way forward is a mix of the two, where it's child-directed and it's adult-directed. And the simple way of framing that is just the people together. adults.
Yeah.
Well, systems thrive on black and white and dichotomy and all that. It's either nature or nurture, or in this case, it's teacher or child. Right? I mean, that's how systems have been. Hierarchical systems have worked in the past, and I think this is one of them. Isn't it?
Alden, I'm really glad you called. I think of the idea of diversity in education. You say this and that. I'd say we should welcome, as long as we're sort of at the local level, making local decisions about our community, our children, and how we want to organize ourselves. That diversity ultimately serves evolution, serves our species better than the monoculture that's been growing.
Right. Thank you, Alden.
Thanks,
Great
Alden.
hearing from you, man.
Thank you all. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Hello, caller. You're on the air. What's your first name?
Hello. This is Sierra.
Hey, hi, Sierra. Thanks so much for taking the time to call.
Hey.
I know you care about education. You're a Fairfax person, right?
I care about everything. I'm doing my best to make nonsense of reality. It's like I gave up on making sense out of it.
So what are your views on education? What's the...
Education, well, where to start? It's like, what is an education and how do you get one? It's all such a mess. It's like we're not all destined to be brain surgeons or ditch diggers, but our system seems to kind of pigeonhole us and try and teach us or tell us we have to be a certain way. And you were talking about the Lagunitas district. I've been part of the Fairfax Ross Valley for years, and there's something here called the MAP program, which is a multi-age program, which isn't perfect, but what is perfect? But recently it's gone the charter route and trying to become charter because, in my opinion, the school district does not really support the extra program of choice.
But parents generally fill in that gap, right?
Yeah, well, the only reason there was the program of choice period is because parents kind of formed it and demanded it about 20 years ago.
Right.
And since then, there's this divide in the community, which I've never understood, which somehow, it comes down to equity and perceived equity, and some people thinking their kids are getting more or less. And to me, it's all just about choice. And how do we teach each kid for who they are and what their aptitudes are, and actually see each child. And the rest of it comes down to a degree, bullying.
Bullying by a system that is looking for participants in that system when they come of age, right?
Really. And, for the most part, there's unschooling, there's homeschooling, there's private schooling, there's...
religious schooling?
Religious schooling. Really, our basic education comes from our parents, and then our community and our society, and what do we believe? Too few of us ever get past our own knee-jerking beliefs and assumptions of much of anything, and our parental cultural beliefs and attitudes are really the most basic, longest lasting, and invisible imprints we take on. How do we get past what we think and are sure that we know? Praise what and whichever beliefs. Why do we shoot and belittle most anyone with ignorance to disagree with us? How do we just have choice? And then, don't even get me started on how do we fund education? Why do we spend so much on military and blowing each other up? It's like...
Well, Bernie has an interesting figure here on how much is funded.
Well, this is according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP. They say we spend $600 billion on public schools every year.
K through 12.
Yeah, but the interesting thing to me also is that by their own testing standards, like of 8th grade proficiency in math, we score 35% of the kids are at the expected proficiency level, and in reading, 36% of the kids in 8th grade have met that standard. And if you break it down by race, for example, in math, whites score at the 45 percentile, blacks at 14, and Hispanics at 21%.
Wow.
That's a fail. That's a fail across the board, but especially a fail to poorer and economically disadvantaged districts.
Yeah.
it's like, what sort of education allows for us to destroy our own fishbowl that we live in, along with having zero regard for all other life forms and our belief in ownership, profit, fences, and byproducts is more valuable than, pure air, clean air, and healthy soil?
Boy, you're talking my song, Sierra. I'm so glad you called. I wanted to add to what you just said is that my understanding was that public education was justified as building an informed electorate. And look at what a mess Americans are in right now in terms of electoral politics.
Where are pitchforks, folks? I mean, it's not our leaders, it's us.
I'm for a revolution, buddy.
Me too.
Thanks so much, Sierra.
Thank you, Sierra.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello, caller. You're on the air at KWMR. What's your first name?
Oh, hi. This is Keegan Steadwell.
Keegan.
Hi, Keegan.
Hello, everyone.
Well, thanks so much for calling in today. What interests you the most?
Well, I am personally fascinated by this subject of education and have been since having children, really, probably since entering the education stream myself, was when I started to see the cracks or the flaws in how it was being presented myself. But you were getting into something about standardization, which I wanted to touch on. And also, I am the director of WISE Academy, which is a public Waldorf offering that just opened on White's Hill. And so my journey has taken me into a role now of directing a program that serves 120 children from kindergarten through 5th grade. We are in our second year, and we are publicly funded, like I mentioned. So the standardization, what's interesting to me about, you were just giving all these statistics about how we're rating in 8th grade, 45%, and especially if you're of color, your chances of proficiency are less and things like that. The opportunity gap is larger for those of color or poverty. But this rush for these test scores, I believe, according to Sir Ken Robinson, stems from a international testing where the countries were placed internationally by a standard test that was offered. And so America ranked low. We were in the 48% or 48 down the track of all the countries in the world. And so there became this legislative push or need to see our children and our test scores climb, and for us to be closer to the Western countries that we emulate and that we feel that we are in competition with and that we want to run this country or that we want to have run the world. And so through that, the bean counters and the legislators and all of these top-down bureaucrats basically have implemented system after system after system. And I think President Bush was involved heavily in his cabinet and his whole effect with No Child Left Behind has incredibly changed the nature of public education, how it's currently being delivered. And the reason is we're hoping to get those test scores up, and the bean counters are saying, well, we need to have 85% proficiency in 8th grade because that will lead to blah, 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 blah. But the part that actually is missing in all of this desire to achieve and to beat out our international competitors in the world is the joy. Mm-hmm. The joy. Because actually, how you teach children is quite different than how you teach adults. How you teach children, in my opinion, in the way that it works the best, is when they don't know that they're learning and they're enjoying it.
That works for me.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a couple pieces to education that when people are working in education, we all have really different opinions as to what we're working toward. What is education? That's a huge question, and it's very personal. It's different for every single person. I was on a school board, and my fellow school board members, some of them believed we were making workers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
unfortunately, that's what we've evolved into as we've allowed it to centralize and standardize ever more. You're talking about it both at a national level and a global level. So we have this sort of global competition going on between nations who have only one view of how can we bring more skilled workers to the economy to grow the economy. And it's all about jobs and economic growth and continuing this industrial civilization that we know has hit bounds. So clearly, that system is very clear on what it wants. But you're right. I don't know how many parents really ask the question of what do I want for my children? What is education to me? Do I want mostly that they can think for themselves, or do I want them to do well financially when they finish their college and get a good job?
Yeah, the pressure is that they all have to get a good job and they all have to do things that we think are the right thing to do when they leave school, when they leave college with a huge debt, instead of encouraging creativity right from the beginning, right?
Well, and I think, to be fair, you've got a lot of parents who are on the wheel who have to really know and hope that the school is going to take care of it because they're busy bringing it home.
Of course.
So, while it may seem that they are not as invested, or ultimately they're hoping that their good school is going to take care of it, what I see is happening in most of the public sector, public education, is the joy from the bean counters. The bean counters influence is sucking the joy from the experience. It's sucking it away from the teachers. It's sucking it away from the class experience, and then therefore the children. We've got this heavy lean on early academics, which report after report after report prove early academics do actually worse. They do harm. They do not get us ahead. You do not want kindergartners reading. There was a beautiful article that just came out about, I think it was actually titled "The Beautiful Illiterate Kindergartners of Finland," and it's all about the fundamental development of the brain of a child. All is learning through play. Play is the place where you are learning gravity.
The experiential part is there.
Experiential.
Yeah.
And it's fun. And so they don't even know that they're learning, but they're literally learning physics. They're learning, their own ability and capacity for what they can do with their fingers and hands, with fine motor skills, gross motor skills, with working in a group. There's so many things.
And they're working at their own pace.
Right.
Where they can actually integrate what's coming in. What I found personally, where school failed me, is they were always ahead. I couldn't really understand it. It wasn't until I got to math that I could finally find something that I was proficient in, because behind in reading, behind in everything, I just kept getting further behind, but I was never held back or anything. Nobody ever worked on that problem with me. I just felt like the school system was zooming by.
Well, and that's what's happening now, is you've got this reading, writing, and arithmetic focus that's letting out art and music and ways that 58% or 68% of the children think. We don't all think the same way. We don't all compute things the same way. But if you have these multiple influences, and any elite school, any of the elite, they don't cut out art, they don't cut out dance, they don't cut out, none of the humanities are cut. In any of the rich people schools. And when you see it coming down in the public sector, and we're having to fight to keep our art teachers hired, and we're having to fight to make sure we have a garden class, when actually these are all the fundamentals that attach the human to their community, to the soil, to the ground. Raven and I know a lot about, bringing in nature, bringing in, dirt.
I was just going to ask you to mention that, because one of the things I like about the WISE Academy, where my son is currently enrolled as a homeschool student, is the emphasis on music, dance, and art and storytelling. And specifically, they do a 4-day week, and the 5th day is this 100%. It's optional, I believe, but it's a 100% outdoor nature-based education, which as a homeschooling student, I also get to participate. And every week, my son goes out. He's outdoors all day in this incredible program, learning about the ecology and wildcrafting and team playing and cooperation. And it's just, I love that aspect of
building the entire brain instead of just the left brain, which is what the school systems are basically.
Which is also why you're seeing the lack of proficiency in the upper grades, because you've got these huge portions of the population of students who don't relate, who cannot get engaged with abstract concepts and abstract math ideas, and they actually really want to learn through shop or through, putting their hands in paint and pigment, or there's so many ways. We are multifaceted, in my opinion, multidimensional beings, and we learn in a lot of different ways. And so how can we keep the joy and keep those children smiling. I talked to a first grader who we had gone to preschool together, and he entered the public system. I said, "Hey, how's school? How you doing?" And he said, "Oh, it's so..." I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, it's so hard." I was like, "What? You're 6. What are you talking about?" He said, "The homework. You know, and it's like so already you've taken a child who innately want to learn, that children want to emulate. They want to learn. They know that they're looking around, and we learn through imitation in the early years. This is how the child develops. And so you've taken a 6-year-old and you're squelching or what do you put it? How do you put it? Diminishing a natural, innate love for learning, and that is a clear sign that the system is broken and needs to be examined, in my opinion, torn down and rebuilt.
Yeah.
Don't
Keegan,
expect to enjoy the rest of your life either.
Keegan, you've offered us a lot of great insight. I just want to go back to one thing you said quickly, and then we'll move along. But learning something at a younger age doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to learn more or become smarter in the end. Yet a lot of parents see this as a pyramid building, and the quicker they move their kids up the ladder, the more successful they'll be. And I think that's a fallacy many can fall into, right?
So right now what we're seeing is the academics are coming into the earlier and earlier grades, and there are kindergarten teachers that are going home in tears because they're being put under pressure, and they're being asked by their job to do something that they know or feel in their hearts and minds, and all their experience is wrong. You do not need to teach a kindergartner to read. That is not actually a foundation that you want to start with. That can actually cause more damage in a child and a lifelong learner than just play-based learning and the freedom of being a child. I mean, when you think of how long one person is actually a child, how long that period lasts. Let's say what? Do you think it ends at 10? Maybe double digit? So 10 years of a 70-year lifespan, that you are in that development phase. Maybe it's 7, maybe it's 8, What is that phase? It's so short in one's life. Sorry, I'm going off. But to take it, to move it away from play and development into kind of better start performing, got to start getting it together, because your job, however far away that is going to need you to be a high performer, is actually a wrong approach.
You're so right. And thank you so much, Keegan, for calling in today and sharing your experience.
Thanks, Keegan.
My pleasure. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It's Sierra again. I just had one quick response.
Oh, hi, Sierra.
Caller spurred me on, if I might.
Yeah, of course.
And that is just independence and creativity. It used to be you'd go out and you'd get yourself into trouble, and you'd get yourself out of trouble on your own or with your friends, and you'd have to figure out what to do to solve the problems, as opposed to now everyone's tied 24/7 to the hive. People don't have any independence. And what kind of education is that? You leave home at 18, 22, whatever, and you have no experience. Instead of
the standardized testing, would you agree with a test that would put kids into a wilderness area and see how they cope?
It's like, kids know how to fill in a bubble. But
Yeah.
I heard a number of years back that MIT and other schools were having trouble with kids that knew how to fill in a bubble. But what they saw also was they had no creative skills for really solving anything. And even, school pranks where people would, do whatever. You have to have the creativity or the desire to actually want to create something or do something, be it, taking apart a Volkswagen and putting it on the roof or whatever. But people are just basically thinking inside the box, and they're not having the experiences of, let's face it, a lot of people, over 50 probably would go to jail today for a lot of things that we did with explosives or fireworks or whatever as a kid. And, some bad things happened and people got hurt here and there and, hurt fingers and whatnot. But we learned from the experiences, too, and something's being lost.
Well, you're right. And I think most parents, fear is that dominant element. They tell their kids early on not to stray away from eyesight at all times. They overreact to injuries and fear strangers as possible pedophiles and kidnappers. They fear for their safety, their future. They make the kids anxious by passing that along. And if parents could sort of back off a little bit and trust their kids, a little more of that free-range parenting would go a long way to helping the kids develop in the way that they really want to see them develop.
I was free range even in the UK. I mean, I had the bike, and I did a paper route in the morning, and I had a bike, and I could go off cycling into the countryside and all that. There was a little story. My dad was a lovely guy, and he loved kids. And as he got to about his 60s, that was when the pedophilia scare was happening over there, and he could not talk to kids in a supermarket anymore. He used to always walk up to kids and say, "Oh, how are you doing?" And he couldn't do it anymore because of this fear that's overcome the Western world.
Oh, on the paper route, forget that. There's too much liability.
Yeah.
Because teachers aren't allowed to touch the children anymore, are they? I know back in England they're not allowed to comfort them or touch them.
Well, as an adult male, I would never touch a young girl, for example. I didn't know. I'd like to sometimes just put my arm on their back, but I'm fearful just of what society might think. Yeah. And it's a shame that we've got to that place. The truth is that the crime statistics are actually, we're safer now than we used to be, but somehow we believe we're worse off.
The boogeyman.
I mean, when I was at school, it was like a prison in England. I hated school. I was terrible at it. Didn't like the other kids. All my creativity and curiosity was squeezed out of me. And, my geography teacher was a pedophile. We all knew he was a pedophile. We learned to navigate around him, and avoid him when he was coming to the playground. And then, the history teacher was abusive and violent. We still had capital punishment at school, and women got the slipper.
Corporal they didn't kill the kids, did they?
Sorry, corporal. Slip of the tongue.
Navigating that.
It was. I got the slipper. I got whacked with the cane and things. In fact, I just want to say this one point because it goes in with what you said about prison. Is that my head teacher wrote in my final report that the only place I was going to end up was prison.
Wow.
And here I am.
That's the kind of system we need. You're still headed for prison.
My English teacher called me the lovable sluggard, which I thought was a lovely thing.
Oh.
Well, Sierra, thanks again for helping us with our program by bringing in lots of input.
We're all in prison, really, by our own beliefs.
Sure.
We are. Thanks again.
Thank you,
Sierra.
Bye, Sierra.
Bye.
Yeah, I was a lovable sluggard. I happened to be good at taking tests, though. Exams. I was good at exams. So
yes, that helps.
I ended up being in the top stream all the way through, even though I was a sluggard.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to add something quickly, and I know we got another call coming in. The homework, it used to drive me crazy because the assumption that the teacher can define for the family what the kids are going to have to do on the weekend and the evenings. And in some cases, it cuts into what would be a healthy amount of sleep for the kids. I think most kids have become sleep deprived because they're so anxious about their homework. And I see that actually as extending the control of the state into the home life. It isn't that they got your kids 5 days a week, 8 to 4. They're really trying to control what goes into their heads all the time. And I think parents and children not under the structure of the school learn as much away from school as they do in school.
Plus, they're doing homework all on the computer now, right? It's all looking at the screen, that glowing screen,
Unfortunately so.
Instead of handwriting, you said? They're not.
They're phasing out handwriting. In fact, they have phased out. I think I said on the show, Finland, I think it is. They phased it out in favor of keyboarding. Wow. And the same thing is happening here in the U.S.
Do we have another caller?
We do. We have another caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air. Can I ask what your first name is?
My first name is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi,
Thanks for calling. What interests you?
I'm a retired 30-year educator. All of my time has been spent in independent schools. So I wanted to give a shout-out for what an earlier caller called the schools for the rich, because they aren't all for the rich.
When you say independent, that means private school to some of us?
It does.
Yeah.
It does, indeed. And in fact, the moniker is changed, I think, intentionally by the National Association of Independent Schools, moving away from private to independent. One of the points that I wanted to make is that, indeed, many of the schools that are not necessarily in West Marin, but are in Marin County, that are private, have substantial financial aid budgets.
Like Marin Academy and Branson, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and Marin Catholic.
Marin Catholic, yeah.
Yeah.
And my time in Marin Independent was at Marin Academy.
That's where my kids went for high school.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. It's a fantastic school, but it's not cheap. I mean, the tuition is like $30,000 a year now or something. It was a lot less when we went.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, you're right. But there is a substantial financial aid, and there is a commitment from the Board of Trustees there, as well as the head of school, to make sure that folks who want to attend, they make every effort to be able to diversify their population, because otherwise it would be completely white. They also have a very active program which reaches into the Canal District, bringing in Latino kids, as well as reaching into the East Bay in order to bring in African American students. But it's a really, you probably know as a parent, it's a very well-rounded place in that there's a huge commitment to the arts, also a huge commitment to outdoor programming, which is required.
Those mini courses were some of the favorite for kids, where they could choose to go learn dog sledding or mountain climbing or scuba diving. I mean, those were fantastic opportunities for kids to get out of the classroom and get real experiential learning.
Absolutely, and they still exist. I mean, there's a commitment that the school makes for a week, which when I first arrived there, I thought, what? Because I arrived as the academic dean, and I thought, wait a minute. And I'd come from a pretty parochial school down in Palo Alto, which is all about academics and getting kids into places like the Ivy. And it was an eye-opener for me, and a beneficial eye-opener for me. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I love the previous caller, two callers before, who was talking about learning being fun. And I call that stealth learning. And it's about teacher planning in such a way that the students are engaged, whether in group or dyads or triads, in project kinds of based things where they don't really even know that they're learning because it's all about collaboration and it's all about exploration. It sort of goes to the design school model that Stanford is working on it currently.
Yeah, that's so true. One of the things I remember as a kid, they talk about when you come back in September after summer off, you've forgotten everything. Well, my view always was, if you forgot everything over the summer, did you really learn anything at all? You tend to learn what you're interested in and what you're involved in. That short-term memory that gets you past the test, that's not really useful long in life, is it?
No, absolutely not. And that's why I have issues with standardized testing in terms of it commands teachers to teach to the test if they want to get the results that they need. So I applaud the Lagunitas district for doing what it's doing in terms of the open school piece. I think that's just fabulous.
Well, thank you so much for adding to our conversation today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so
we've talked a lot about our school systems, both private but we haven't talked a lot about unschooling.
Oh, sure.
Right, I'd like to know what that actually means.
I'll talk about that, shall I?
Yes.
Since that's something I'm very interested in.
What's the difference between homeschooling and unschooling, Raven?
The difference between it's a kind of subset of homeschooling in that the difference is really that children are not forced to follow any kind of curriculum, lessons, or tests.
Yeah.
It's totally independent. It focuses on the parent. You have to really trust that the child has an innate ability to learn without any kind of coercion. We're going to learn this. We're going to do this now. It's the school. It's the child itself that's invited to explore their passions and their interests and not follow anyone else's agenda, including and maybe especially the parents.
And how are you working with your son? You're watching it. How do you see it unfolding?
Well, he's only 7, and we've been battered by the education system already. We've tried. This is our 5th attempt at a school.
But doesn't he sometimes get into something for a long time where he's totally enthralled by some aspect of nature or Legos or something?
He's very enthralled by Legos, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
but isn't that a huge learning time? As long as he stays with it, he's obviously still solving some problems and learning to be creative.
No, he's definitely learning to be creative and to think outside of the box. And my job as a facilitator not to teach him these things, but just to see, well, right now he's interested in trains, so how can I take him to the train museum, show him how to build a train out of Legos, take him to the library, we look at train books, maybe we go for a train ride, and that's unschooling, to guide his learning process.
Yeah, I've talked to some people who are fans of homeschooling, but then feel like, well, that's because these parents are ideally suited for it, and not all kids have are fortunate enough to have parents who can do it.
Well, that's true. I don't have to. I can work from home.
No, but it isn't that the parent needs to have all the knowledge necessarily that teachers have, but has to have the right approach, right? Has to have that attitude of how can I point them somewhere? I mean, most parents can Google where they can get more information to take their child so they can experience something in the real world rather than just from a book.
I mean, a lot of parents, as Keegan pointed out, are working full-time, so it doesn't work for
that's a
everybody.
problem. But I think that parents might reconsider, do we really need to be a two-family income, or can one parent afford to stay home and do really what might be the most important job we have?
That's how I feel about it. I mean, I think children belong with their families. I don't really want to hand the education of my child over to other people 5 days a week for 6 hours a day, people who may not share the same values, who may not have the same philosophy of life. I mean, I think life is too short, and I really want my son to be at home with me, especially in these early years. I think as he gets older, I could see the Marin Academy and project-based learning with other kids would become more important. But at age 5, 6, and 7, I don't know. I'd rather have him at home.
Well, I think you're setting a good example, and I want to thank you, Raven. I want to thank you, Paul, and thanks to our listeners and our great callers today. I really appreciate everybody's participation in this show, and hope you'll tune in every Thursday at 11, because your voice really does matter.